Right. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? I think we're going to get started. Uh, Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Luis Klein. I am the Executive Director of the Juvenile Justice Initiative, and we're very happy to see everyone today. Just a reminder that if you're seeking CLE credits, be sure to sign in and to leave your evaluation form at the table on your way out. And if you need to take a call, please feel free to step out in the space. You know, there's a nice big space right behind us. Feel free to step out at any time. And we will be taking questions and comments at the end of the presentation. So please save questions and comments till the end. So first, for those who are not familiar with the work of the Juvenile Justice Initiative, we're a privately funded nonprofit, and the reforms that JJI promotes are in line with the goals and aspirations of international human rights and the children's rights movement. Today, we want to express our gratitude to the Chicago Community Trust and to our other funders who've made this program possible. So we're here to talk about youth justice and how that has evolved. And the definition of childhood is expanding. And in short, it's those difficult years between childhood and maturity, right? So it's what the common language has come to define as emerging adults. So Illinois was the home of the world's first juvenile court in 1899. This work came from the work of an advocacy community which was based in the Hull House community, which is why our program today is called "What Would Jane Addams Say?" It was a group of women activists, progressive activists, who recognized that children were different and who were horrified with how children were being treated by the justice system at the time. That children were finding themselves in adult prisons and in workhouses, specifically in workhouses with other with adults, and that this was inappropriate. So they campaigned. The Illinois State Legislature, and in 1899 passed the first Juvenile Court Act, which established the juvenile court in Chicago, in Fort Cook County, across the street from the Hull House. And the model was designed to meet the unique needs of children and their families. The framework was created kind of out of this outgrowth of urbanization, right? Like Chicago had very recently experienced the Chicago fire. A brand new city had grown around it, new urbanization, new industrialization, and this was all new, right? Like we'd never really experienced this. And so the justice system very quickly adapted and led the world in this regard, right? We were the very first juvenile court in the, not just in the country, but in the world. And by the 1920s, all but 2 states had created juvenile courts. And around the world, jurisdiction and policies, the jurisdictional and policy ambitions of the Illinois Juvenile Court was copied. So we started seeing juvenile courts adopted in England, Germany, everywhere, throughout Latin America. Like there was this worldwide recognition, right, that children are different. And I've kind of been joking, right, that like we, our understanding of brain development, right, and a lot of this is how, a lot of the last decade we've seen huge advancements in brain development and understanding how young adults' brains develop, and they're just we're learning through science. Like the science is just catching up to what parents have known forever, right? what Jane Addams knew 100 years ago, what insurance companies have known, sorry, Scott, I'm taking your joke, and what what car rental services have known for decades, right? That there's a reason why they don't rent to people under 25, right? Like they had data that showed that people are different, that young adults are different. So like the science is just catching up to what a lot of people already knew. So today, almost every nation has a separate system for children in conflict with the law. And the juvenile court model is recognized a century before, as I said, a century before adolescent brain development research, that children are different, and that most of these young people that have broken the law, as Jane Addams said, that most of these young people who had broken the law in their blundering efforts to find adventure, right? What we would call a lack of inhibition today. So there were two major reforms in juvenile justice after 1899. The first was a series of U.S. Supreme Court opinions in the mid-1960s, which recognized that juvenile courts, although not fully adult, were also not just kangaroo courts, but rather a court with basic due process protections, including the right to counsel and right to confrontation. And the second major reform was the development of international conventions on the rights of the child, incorporating all of the U.S. juvenile court protections, including due process, and also setting aspirations for children's rights to a home, education, health care, safety, right? Very basic human rights. And for children in conflict with the law, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, or the CRC, offers three major protections: a reasonable minimum age of prosecution, the protection of juvenile courts for all children under the age of 18, and a restriction on deprivation of liberty to a last resort. To date, only one nation has failed to ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that's the United States. Now, the United States played a vital role in the writing of the convention and in the development of the convention, but 30 years after its authorship, we still have not ratified it, and we're no closer to ratifying it today. So today we're examining the aspirations for juvenile court in 1899, where we led the world in protections for children versus today's juvenile court system in Illinois. Our panelists are all board members of the Juvenile Justice Initiative, and our moderator is WBEZ reporter Chip Mitchell, who covers juvenile and adult justice issues in Illinois. Before joining WBEZ, sorry, I'm going to do a little bit of your bio. Before joining WBEZ, he reported from Columbia for the BBC and NPR, among other outlets. And his background includes, a focus on, can I see it? Sorry, I can't see the rest of my notes. But
I have them here.
Oh, let me see.
Immigration in Latin America.
There we go. And he graduated from the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. So, Chip?
Madison. It's all right.
In Madison.
It's great to be here,
Thank you,
and I'm going to learn a lot here today. I've already learned a lot, and I want to invite in, if people want to join the discussion, and just insert themselves with a question, they can't wait to the end when we're going to just open it up wide. Just holler, and I'll come out with I'll do the Phil Donahue and come out with a microphone so the people online can hear. So as Luis was saying, our first panelists, they're going to look at the juvenile justice system in light of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. The first right they'll examine is the right to reasonable minimum age. So the international recommendation is 14. Below that, children are presumed to lack capacity to violate criminal law. And on this, our speaker is going to be Alderman Michael Rodriguez. Mike, head up here. He is the alderperson of Chicago's 22nd Ward, which includes Little Village. Before that, he was executive director of Enlace Chicago, where he focused largely on community violence prevention. Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Chip. Luis is a little taller than me. Maybe it's just the hair, I don't know. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so good to see the crowd. It's such a pleasure to be here. I just walked over from City Council. I was a little worried that I wasn't going to make it on time because, and not because my colleagues are blowhards and talk too much. No, it was because of that. The fact is, we were just naming our new police superintendent, Larry Snelling, to the post, and it was a 48-0 vote to name now Superintendent Snelling to the post. So it's not lost upon me that today is a very interesting day when we talk about public safety, when we talk about the atmosphere of juvenile justice in our great city, in our great state, and the naming of someone who's from the city of Chicago, but also someone who I do think, when we talked in person, really believed in this community police relationship and how we cannot create safer streets if we don't have more confidence in our policing relationship with communities. And that's largely based off of making sure that we have an accountable police district, police environment. Anyways, I'm going off on a tangent, so forgive me. But it's my pleasure to be here, and it's my pleasure to be on the board of JJI. I was told I have about 75 minutes to speak. No?
Yeah.
No? Okay.
Keep it.
Chip and I are friends. We used to play softball together. He probably doesn't want me saying that because as a journalist, he's supposed to. But we haven't played softball together for at least 10 years.
At least a decade.
Yes, at least a decade. We're both older, and I used to play shortstop. I probably am a good left bench right now. But to the topic, I wanted to tell a brief story because I think that's the kind of person I am. I don't like just to talk about policy. I like to talk in a narrative of story. And it was just yesterday where I was in my ward, 2 blocks from my house at 3047 South Lawndale. I was there at the corner of 27th and Lawndale. And if anyone knows Little Village and knows 27th and Lawndale, right that corner is a dividing line between 2 street organizations, or as others would put, gangs in Little Village, historic gangs. On the west side of the neighborhoods, the 2-6, on the east side is the Latin Kings. And right there on 27th and Lawndale sits New Life Church. And New Life Church is a restorative justice hub. They serve as a restorative justice hub. And New Life has a great restorative justice program. They have mentors. They have an alternative to incarceration. Every young person on juvenile probation in Little Village is sent to their alternative to detention program called the Urban Life Skills Program. And it was there yesterday where I was hanging out with a young man. Now I think he's around 18, 19, 20 years old, and he works at their food pantry. He works full time at their food pantry. This young man named, I'm gonna call him Isaac. It's not his real name, but for a variety of purposes, I'll just use the name Isaac. And Isaac was there, and he was in this food pantry, and he was putting food packets together for what was largely immigrants and migrant individuals leveraging this food pantry. And Isaac was there from 5 o'clock in the morning up until his shift ends at around, I think it's 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And throughout that whole time, he was putting food packages together. He had a dolly moving fresh produce from the truck onto this beautiful facility that was made by New Life Church and this food pantry. And it was very interesting to know that Isaac was working hard at this job. And I was asking him why he loved this job so much. And he was talking about how he's from the neighborhood and how all he dreamed of doing when he was a kid, being raised by his grandmother, who was a parishioner at New Life Church, who always wanted for Isaac to do well in his life. But it wasn't lost upon me that I first met Isaac when he was 12 years old, some 6, 7, 8 years ago, when he was a mentored young person in the Urban Life Skills program. When he was, as a young person, as early as the age of 12, acting out, holding guns, who was a young person who was starting to get involved with gang life, and who was adjudicated in our juvenile justice system, arrested, put away. But for some reason, a judge thought it appropriate to, instead of incarcerating Isaac, he sent him to the New Life Restorative Justice Program, the Urban Life Skills Program, where Isaac received mentorship from Art Guerrero. Art Guerrero, some of you may know him, is a guy who I was proud to be one of the first people to hire him after he had found God and found his educational guidance and became a real mentor in the neighborhood, an amazing human being who I actually knew when I was a young person growing up because we grew up on the same block. Art had his troubles back in the day, but he, as I said, found God, found his education, and became a true pillar of our community. Well, he walked Isaac through his young years, and I'm very thankful that Isaac became a proud, productive member of our society. And Isaac, let me tell you, his mother, drug addicted, father, probably never knew him, right? Think about everything that Isaac has gone through. His grandmother, God rest his soul, her soul, just died during the COVID epidemic from getting COVID, right? Was one of our casualties in this pandemic. Due to the disproportionate impact that Black and brown folks were seeing in the healthcare system, no prevention. So think about everything Isaac had gone through, right? Let's talk about this young person. No parenting system or parent who was drug addicted, being raised by a grandmother who was diabetic, who kind of didn't know what to do with her myriad of grandchildren she was taking care of. Everything stacked against Isaac. He went the wrong way at a very young age. But he received the appropriate, in my opinion, interventions that now led him onto a path where he is now serving his community, where he is now engaged in positive community development activities, and he's such an example of what we want out of our youth. Look, our judicial system, I believe, is really stacked against our young people. I joined JJI because I saw the data. In the early 80s, we had a war on drugs, Reaganomics, which really was a war on inner city communities, Black and brown communities. We went from several 100,000 people in federal and state penitentiaries incarcerated to several million. 25% of the world's incarcerated are our great country. We only have 5% of the world's population. I think that's ludicrous. I think we need to be smart on crime rather than just tough on crime. So when it comes to juvenile justice, I'm a firm advocate that we need to make sure that we're adjudicating our young people appropriately. Across the world, we do this differently. At the very least, I think what we should be doing is raising the juvenile age for adult court jurisdiction. One of the main things that we do at JJI is advocate to raise those minimum age. We've done that already successfully, and it's proven to have worked. I think we need a reasonable age on minimum court jurisdiction as well. I think I'm supposed to look at the next slide as well. You know, I think Luis said it well as far as our country being on the outs when it comes to norms across our world, as far as at what age do we start engaging young people in a criminal justice system that really isn't built to serve them, right? So I'll leave it there. I know that we have some illustrious and amazing presenters that are coming after me. I know that I'm probably not going to delve too much into the policy. I just wanted to articulate this story of a young man, Isaac, who we need to serve better. And there's so many young people in our society at the age of 16 and 17 that are adjudicated as adults, as early as the age of 13, 14, 15 right now, that are adjudicated as adults. And I imagine their outcomes and how different they would be if we had a better system of adjudication, not of adjudication, of walking with our young people and showing them the love that they deserve in order to create better outcomes. So I think I'll leave it there.
So Illinois right now has no minimum age for delinquency for juvenile court, and the international recommendation is for 14. But I have a question for you, Alderman. You represent not only kids accused of crimes, but a lot of victims of violence and various antisocial behavior by young kids, and younger than 14. So I just want to ask, how would a minimum age of 14 affect public safety in your ward? And what sorts of guardrails would your ward need to make sure that the behavior changes?
So Chip, I thank you for the question, and I want to again reflect on my own story. You know, I'm a person who got involved. I think my first job was as a youth mentor at Petrowski Park on 31st and Keeler over there. If anyone knows Home Run Inn Pizza, the original, the best pizza in the world, right across streets Petrowski Park. And that's where at the age of 18, I decided to start mentoring young people who are at risk of being the victims of perpetrators of violence. But I really wanted to do that work because at the age of 10, I experienced the first death in my family. It was my uncle who OD'd. And at the age of 12, my other uncle who was beaten over the head with a bat and was murdered. And to this day, we do not know who committed that crime. Look, it's not lost upon me that perpetrators are victims and victims are perpetrators, and it's largely the same individual. We have what I like to call community post-traumatic stress disorder. CPT, I'm going to write an article on this someday. Somebody will help me out. Maybe I'll be the ghostwriter. But the fact is, I don't think you could separate victim and perpetrator. And the fact is that we do need to hold perpetrators accountable. I am a strong believer in restorative justice. We need to restore justice in an instance, and that means both victim and perpetrator are restored. So I don't think we can go in here with blinders on. The fact is that I'm not one of those who believes, look, I have a long-term North Star view that I would love a world where we have no police. I'm at heart an abolitionist. But in my day-to-day working with people, there was a 16-year-old who was shot in the head the other day on 26th Street. I was at the LSC meeting this morning with LSC members and parents talking about that incident 2 blocks from this school where this happened. Thank God the young person was grazed in the head and she'll be out of the hospital very soon. But the fact is that we need to find those perpetrators. I've got no issue with that. We definitely need to, and we need to hold them accountable. The fact is we don't need them running the streets in that way. But how do we hold them accountable? How do we make sure? Let's take another step here. Why are we the only westernized country in the world where we have access to guns the way we do? Like, I'm sorry, I just don't think that makes any sense. We have common sense gun laws that we need to enact, right? So, like, forgive me, I went off on a lot of tangents, but I think the core of the issue is that we need to be smart on crime, not just tough on crime, and that means we need to treat people more holistically from the outset.
All right, very good, Alderman Michael Rodriguez, 22nd Ward, Chicago, Little Village. So in that UN community convention, that UN convention on the rights of the child, the second major right for kids in conflict with the law is to be tried and sentenced only in juvenile court. A 2007 reminder from the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child said that means everyone under age 18 is tried as a juvenile, no exceptions. So we're going to bring up Professor Herschela Conyers right now. So she chairs the board of the Juvenile Justice Initiative. She's a clinical professor in public interest law at the University of Chicago and a former deputy chief of the Cook County Public Defender's Office. And she's going to talk about harm from prosecution in adult court and about an effort in Illinois to comply with the international right.
Can somebody help me with this? Okay. It's fine, yeah. I am so happy to be here. Thank you all for coming. A lot of what I was going to say has already been said, but I think it bears repeating. And as I was preparing for this, because the topic is what would, Addams have said? What would Jane Addams say? And I think that Jane Addams would be asking questions rather than making statements. I think Jane Addams would be asking us, is this really only how far we have come in 100 years? I think she would ask us, haven't we learned anything about or from the child labor laws and why they were enacted? Haven't we learned anything about how debilitating poverty can be? And that is not just money poverty, that is human soul property that we have abandoned with some of our children. Have you learned anything from or about racism, sexism, including bias against HDBQ plus people? What have been the takeaways? Who won the war on drugs? Who won the war on poverty? I'm asking for Jane, okay? And so I think we need to come up with, and I think the other thing that Jane would ask is, do you know anything? Have you heard anything about adolescent brain development? It's real. It is real. And, how many people in this room are parents? Okay. How many people went through, I'm leaving my hand up, how many people went through what I had termed the knucklehead years? Okay? How many people got a response, something like this, which my kid always said to me? Can I go out? It's only 10:30 p.m. on Tuesday. He knew the answer. What it was going to be was no. And for like 5 years, I started to change my name. Everything I said, he said, oh, Mom, man. And it's like, right, he'll grow out of it, and he's a marvelous adult male. But it really is, for me, knuckleheadism. That's a very simple way to understand adolescent brain development. But what we have to couple adolescent brain development with are also trauma, ACEs. All of that comes together and spinning around in the brain of a 15-year-old boy, a 16-year-old girl. We need to be much more patient than we are about them coming into their own, about them becoming responsible people. And some of us are going to say the same things. So many of my clients have been victims. It's not either or. It is not either or. I represented a client. He's maybe 21 now. He's been shot in the same leg 3 times. I can't imagine what that's like. And if you see your cousin shot, you see your friend shot, you see even just acquaintances shot on a fairly routine basis. And when I say routine, I mean once in life is enough. Once in life is too much. But where in the last 30 years, my clients don't go to birthday parties, they go to anniversary parties, because to celebrate, this is the day Pookie got shot. This is the day John was killed. I hope never to go to a party like that, and to have attended many of them before your 21st birthday is abhorrent to me. And I think we're all accountable. I really do think we are all accountable, because the whole notion of community escapes us. This is Chicago. I am Chicago born and raised. And when we think of community, we think of several square blocks divided off by viaducts, by, names. We talk about gangs now, but the history of Chicago is that we were racially divided, You had to be past some viaduct before it got dark. And the Chicago police, and not long ago, would take kids and drop them in the wrong territory and tell them try to get home before sundown. That's mean, that's cruel, and we can't expect more from our kids than we expect from our adults. I'm just saying, that's not possible. So, again, I thought people would have questions, and I do want to leave time for that. But the physical and nutritional concerns, because hunger, it should be part of the ACEs assessment. So many of my clients, their first offense is stealing. And so many of my clients, the first thing they steal is food. It's not nutritional food, but it's food, right? That should tell us something. That should make us all feel badly. And let me put it on even a broader scale. We glorify violence. We glorify it in our video games. We glorify it in our movies. I don't think there's anybody in this room that has not seen The Godfather. Is there anybody that has not seen it? Is there anybody who has even just only seen it once? Okay, there's hope for you. There's hope for you. We've watched Godfather 1, Godfather 2. We've watched some man order his brother's murder for power. That's not a good example to set, is it? No. And we reward people who actually make money getting rich. We do. We admire people who get rich. We admire people who, get contracts again before they get more money than their brain can even absorb. They haven't turned 25 and they're multimillionaires. This impacts kids, this impacts children who are not athletes and who do not have stellar performances in athletics in high school. That's a problem. And then the schools themselves, this has been one of my things I've been trying to advocate for. I think we'd have less kids in detention centers and kiddie prisons if we made the schools, in fact, a better community. And when I say a better community, and I know there's a teachers union, but we can work that out. I think schools should be open from at least 7 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock at night. You can have breakfast with your kid on your way to work. You can have a snack with your kid on the way home. The kid doesn't have to be left in the house looking after other kids. I know that's bold, I know that costs tax dollars, but God, aren't we spending tons of money already for the wrong things that have not worked? And the cost of incarcerating a child is not a small cost. And if the schools became neighborhood friendly and open to people to come in and share and have programs like this after school, I think we would see better performance from the kids who go there, better performance. Because again, neighborhood is built from the inside out. And again, I'm telling my age, but as adults, we must be vigilant. We must be more in the street, okay? The worst thing when some of us was coming up was Miss So-and-so saw us and she would reprimand us. And that was okay as long as she promised not to tell my mother she saw me, right? That's what neighborhood is. Neighborhood is every kid I look at, I gotta try to find something of value in them when they don't see any value in themselves. And that's the hard kid, where the kid himself sees no particular value in himself, but gets gratification and gets acknowledgement through gang membership, through, robbing little old ladies. And again, it's too much to expect that our children will be different than us in terms of wanting money. Everything's got to have a designer label on it, or it's they don't want it. So I say the other thing, I think we should reopen and expand vocational schools. The old ones aren't working out. I mean, you know, technology brings us further, but that we should open vocational schools back up, amp up the curriculum, but also restore some of the old curriculums. There are people in this room, we would pay small fortunes for custom carved wooden chairs. We would pay for objects of beauty. We would pay for good carpenters, you know? So I think there should be, and because every kid's not going to go to college. Every kid should not need to go to college to give to community. And some of my clients have been they have been gifted. And when I say my clients, just to be perfectly clear, I have represented kids, not just accused of misdemeanors. I have represented children accused of murder as young as 10 years old. And one I will name now because at this point he's a middle-aged man. He's extraordinary, Xavier McElrathie. And you want to see a rap sheet, you should have seen his by the time he was 13. He had a rap sheet as long as I had been away from home. He was tried as an adult. It was painful. It was stunningly painful. And he is responsible, I've always, like I said, done juvenile work, but he is responsible for making me do what I am asking you to do, is find where your bias is. Find where you've contributed to harming children by your acts or the absence of your acts, that you have not spoken out about something. And I know you were teasing me about, all right, what about all these kids and shouldn't we be tough on crime? We should be tough on the causes of crime. We should not be tough on the perpetrators of it. Questions, concerns?
We want to hear more about HB 2128.
Okay. And that, did you?
I think we did.
Okay. Well, here, we can pass it back and forth.
All right. We'll just hold the mic. Check. All right. Tell us more about, well, current Illinois law allows prosecution of children as young as 13 in adult court. Some young people are automatically tried in adult court without any hearing in juvenile court, and that's based just on their age, 16 or 17, and the charged offense. So tell us about, what do you know about HB 2128? It passed out of committee, but then didn't move further.
Raise the age. I'm all for it. Again, one act does not change your brain. You don't, you know, and this has been abandoned. But years ago, when we were talking about kids being Mirandized at the police station and being behind in school and some not even able to read, there was always a pat phrase. And that pat phrase was, oh, he's street smart. It makes me want to barf, okay? And I used to tell people, why did I spend all that time and money with my child at St. Ignatius? I should have just put his ass out and let him get smart. I'm saying, right? That's absurd and obscene, and it is an excuse. So there should be cutoffs regardless of, no matter what the offense is, no child should be punished as an adult until that child gets to be an adult, as we call it. And I think we probably should raise the age on up to over 21, but that's personal. I'll take what I can get.
Okay, so this was HB 2128. It passed out of committee, but then it didn't go further. It did have support from none other than the Illinois State Bar Association. There are prosecutors in that group. So I think it's safe to assume that this legislation is going to be brought back.
It's going to be brought back. And for the record, some of my best friends are prosecutors. Yeah, they are. No, seriously, no, no. And but we need to make those types of alliances in all seriousness, because nothing is more important than having ethical, committed prosecutors. This system is not going away. We have to make it better on all sides. So we need prosecutors who understand adolescent child development, prosecutors who understand ACEs and trauma and work at it and want to understand it. We cannot play without them. So the goal is to agree where we can, try to raise consciousness, and see what at least some middle ground. But again, for us to be the only country that has not ratified the rights of the child, this is not about sort of everyday people. This is a political position, again, that I think because we are not as homogenous as other countries are, I think our diversity and our differences have allowed us to just be mean to each other and to not see your child as my child and my child as your child. And we've got to just keep working at that as hard as we can. And who knows, I'm a big believer in 20-year overnight successes. So we're going to keep
All right.
fighting.
Professor Herschella Connors, University of Chicago, thank you very much. Okay, so here's the last of the three major rights in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. When kids are in trouble with the law, they have the right to be sentenced and treated at home. Removal from home is a last resort. So the Illinois Juvenile Court Act includes last resort language for sentencing children after a finding of guilt, but not for detention of children before trial. And here is the statute. Do we have it up? Can we see it? It says sentencing a child under 18 to juvenile prison must be the least restrictive alternative. And there must be a showing of efforts to find less restrictive alternatives. But the statute, the statutory limit on using juvenile prison for children is limited to sentencing after a finding of guilt, and children must be at least 13 and found guilty of a felony. Before trial, children as young as 10 can be detained, even for misdemeanors. So our next speaker is Veronica Williams. She's the founder of the Lake County-based group Mothers Against Wrongful Convictions. She says there's harm from even one night of detention, and she sees a need to comply with the international standard and use detention only as a last resort. Veronica, thanks.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the organization that I represent here. It has been a wonderful journey, and I'm so proud of the work that we do and how we do it and how we focus on our children and our youth. I like to call them youthful offenders and not put negative connotations on them. And I think what Jane Addams would say, when I researched and understood what those organizers and individuals were doing, they would turn over in their grave. They would say, what's going on? As Herschella said, what is going on? How did we get to where we are now from way back when they had a vision and a purpose of our adults who were, as we said, different. Their brains developed different. They knew then that they had a vision and a purpose for our children to be reintegrated into society at a younger age. And it was not built on punishment, it was built on rehabilitation. We are not rehabilitating our youth. We are putting them in detention, locking them up, and throwing away the key. It's personal for me. That's another issue. However, there is hope because we have advocates in the room here. We have advocates outside working to make change. We go out to invoke change, but are we really doing the change? Our children, especially our Black and brown children, have been marginalized, victimized, and criminalized. What is that saying about us in our society? We have a broken system, A system, in my opinion, that has been turned into a monster that is now a beast, and now we're rushing to fix it. How do we fix it? What does that look like? That looks like us coming together as a community, joining forces to make sure that these kids do not get put in detention. My daughter-in-law works at the Depke Center right now in Juvenile Detention Center. There is a young girl, 13 years old, right now, I can't see her name, for murder. 13 for murder. A young boy was arrested and put in detention for a crime he did not commit a few months ago in Lake County. If his coach had not came forward and said he was not there at the time of the crime, that young boy would have been looking at life. How do we hold those who coerced him into saying he did it accountable, at the same time holding community accountable? What does that look like? I say that there is a term that a friend of mine uses, and I've come to use it unequivocally, called selective redemption. We give selective redemption to those we feel like deserve it. Who gets the worst of the worst? Who gets the worst punishment? Who gets to go home? Who stays in detention? Who leaves? However, we need to understand that justice without mercy and grace, there is no redemption. And it has to be justified through mercy and grace, or our system will not move forward in terms of looking at the best way to serve our children so that they come out successful, that they have a fighting chance, so that the system can work. We give out the worst punishment in this country. It's sad, but true, the worst. And why? Our children deserve better. And what does that look like moving forward? Well, everyone in this room deserves redemption. And if we feel that children don't deserve redemption and what that looks like, then God help us.
Veronica Williams, founder of Mothers Against Wrongful Convictions. Well, I have a question, and I think I want to ask it of Luis, but I also want to ask it of you while you're here. What do you think? We've been talking about international norms, international law. What do you think Jane Addams would say if she knew that Illinois, we're 120 years later, home to the world's first juvenile court, that it was this far out of line with international child rights at this point?
I think she would say that we would have to do better, that we would have to get, like we're doing now, get involved legally. And what does that look like moving forward? Holding our counterparts, those who have the ability to make and change laws, holding them accountable. And what does that look like? I work closely with the state's attorney up in Lake County. I give him ideas. He calls me and I tell him, look, this is something you need to be doing. I think we need to work together with legislation, what that looks like moving forward. If we're not as involved as communities should be, and when our children get involved, we have advocacy, working with legislators, giving them ideas, because they're only human too, and they don't know sometimes what to do. So we give them ideas. As a parent, as an advocate, I can get involved and make a difference seeing that we're working together. And I think that's how we can move forward as well. And I think that's what she was doing at that time. She was walking and talking with those who had the ability to invoke change and make it happen. So I think that's how we need to make it happen, is by getting involved, speaking up, speak out, stand up. It doesn't matter. If we're not doing that, how is that going to look? We're going to stay stagnant.
Interesting. Luis, you want to take a swing at that one too?
Yeah.
So the question is, what would Jane Addams think if she looked at our setup right now for juvenile justice 120 years later after she forged the first juvenile court?
Yeah, I mean, I think Herschella made a good point, right? I think first she would ask a whole lot of questions, but then ultimately, I think she'd be disappointed that, you know, a lot of her work at Hull House, right, was based around holistic care, right? And you know, that's sort of the root of social work, right? And she was one of the founders of like modern social work, is addressing root causes. And so much of what we do in our justice system fails to address root causes, right? Like we look at issues of public policy as if they exist in silos. You know, that criminal justice is over here, and education is over here, and housing is over here, and food security is over here, and that there's no connections to any of them, right? We can solve one today, and we'll answer the next one next year. And like, that's just not how society works. That's not how child development works, right? Like, whether a child has food security impacts their performance in school, which can, and you know, if they don't have housing security, they can, you know, that leads to a buildup of trauma and them acting out, and that acting out can escalate and then end up in system you know, in system involvement, and you know, and like things can spiral. And that's something that she understood then that we have kind of lost the thread on today. And our public policy and our policymakers have to come back to understanding holistic solutions to the problems that exist today.
All right, Louise Klein, Juvenile Justice Initiative. Veronica Williams, founder of Mothers Against Wrongful Convictions in Lake County. Thank you very much. So we're going to turn to some global trends in juvenile justice. We're going to start with Scott Mann. You can head up here. He's the Assistant Director of the Illinois Juvenile Defender Resource Center. That's part of the State Appellate Defender's Office. It's like a statewide public defender. Scott's going to talk about an emerging movement that has to do with young adults.
So hi, good to see everybody. And so I sort of took a similar tactic to what Professor Conyers did, which was to sort of think about this within the framework of what would Jane Addams say. And so I apologize that I'm just, you know, running with your theme. I also admit the first thing I stole was food, and not real food, but tasty cakes. If you're from the East Coast, you'll understand. They are a thing worth taking. But obviously, you know, when I got caught, the consequences were I had to go in and apologize. Wonder why. So on this idea of young adult justice, I think she might begin by asking what the hell happened. Or perhaps she would note that everything old is new again. And I encourage you to Google and read the piece that Jane Addams wrote in Ladies' Home Journal on the juvenile adult offenders from October of 1913. I'm going to talk for almost 10 minutes, so you can Google it now and read. That is going to be every bit as good a use of your time. But it details examples of police not notifying parents that a kid is in custody. Details unsafe and unsanitary conditions of confinement. It details torture of kids by police. It details the disparate treatment of those who can afford cash bail to those who do not. It details inadequate measures towards expungement. So yeah, everything old is new again. It's all still here. And while we do see some changes around the corners, and those changes are significant, I'm going to talk about them some here today, I think she would be really curious as to what we've been doing for 120 years, that all of this is still present where we are today. So thinking about this population, the young adult population, that she has a quote talking about that Chicago was startled by the number of children being brought into juvenile court during the first 10 years of its existence. 14,000 delinquents, 11,000 of them boys, and the rest were girls. These large figures show that in addition to those boys under the age of 17 and girls under the age of 18, there must be an equally, if not greater, number of individuals in this young adult population that are just in badly in need of these additional protections, and yet there is no legislation concerning, there's been nothing undertaken in order to address that population. And when they are brought into court, there is nothing being done to think about them any differently from a different adult in front of a judge. Now, in some ways, Jane Addams didn't know how good she had it at that time. because while she helped bring about the first juvenile court, and by God, if you've ever read an amicus brief I've written or anything, that like when we are trying to advocate for change here today, we always start with that, like Illinois, home of the first juvenile court. We should be proud. Are we though? So at that time that she was writing in 1913, we didn't just have a binary system of our court system. We had the juvenile court, and then we had a court process that would send people into the Department of Corrections, but we also had a reformatory system. We had a middle ground. And that reformatory system was separate from the correctional system. Individuals up to the age of 21 could be sent to the reformatory instead of prison. In a biennial report to the General Assembly, or to the governor, that was happening during the exact same time that Jane Addams was writing this in 1913, the Board of Managers wrote that that Illinois is an outlier in the fact that in this system of reformatory, we're only going up to the age of 21, that the rest of the country goes much farther. And that noting that the consensus of penologists then, the big thinkers, was that it should be at least 25. And so Illinois was already out of step, despite Illinois being home to the first, yada, yada, yada. So the legislature responded in 1916 and expanded the age of that reformatory up until the age of 26. And so accepting capital cases, except for the death penalty, it would be up to the discretion of a judge to send a young adult to the reformatory instead of our systems of corrections. So Illinois at that time categorized youth and young adults up into their mid-20s as deserving of these special protections and recognize their unique potential for reform and change. So as Dr. King, wonderfully taught us that the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice, but that is not how our criminal legal system works. Our criminal legal system is a pendulum. It swings one way, it swings the other. And so while perhaps the pendulum was swinging in a positive direction there in the early part of the 20th century, by God, it started swinging in the other direction. And I would argue one of the reasons why it started to swing towards what I would not call justice had to do with our military-industrial complex. We had a draft, and that draft age in the 1940s, we lowered the draft age down to 18. So all of a sudden, we're starting to take what had been adults and moving them into this system where we're sending them off to die. And that sort of created this adultification. They're old enough to go die for you. And that sort of gets you into the 1970s when we pass a constitutional amendment lowering the age of voting down to 18, which again, should be done. But that also makes it easier to just treat an 18-year-old exactly as you would a 30-year-old, because we're saying they are equal. And for some reasons they should be, but not when it comes to what it is that Jane Addams knew when she was writing this in 1913 and when she was advocating for the creation of separate systems in the late 1800s. So obviously after, we figure out the draft thing, we go to a voluntary system, but then we have the war on drugs, which we've already talked about. Still don't know who won. Well, we actually know who won. And that brings us into our time in sort of the 80s and 90s when the popular refrain was old enough to do the time, old enough to do the crime, old enough to do the time. So not only are we treating 18, 19, and 20-year-olds exactly as we would a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old who's done this, but now we're moving more and more kids up into that situation. And Illinois starts moving a whole lot of kids into our adult criminal system. And our nation is still executing children In 1989, the US Supreme Court is asked, like, is it okay to execute a 16-year-old? They say, yeah, it is. Fine. So what is it that happened between 1989 and 2005 when the US Supreme Court looks at that exact same question, can we execute a child? And they say, no, we no longer can. And this is grounded in the Eighth Amendment, and this is grounded in this one outlier to originalism, which is that the Eighth Amendment is guided by our evolving standards of decency, marked by the progress of a maturing society. Incrementally. Maybe we're getting a little bit different, but what is it that changed between 1989 and 2005? I'm a sucker for the TV show Frontline, because if that narrator ever said my name, that would be it. I'm done. If that person says it, it's got to be true. There's a Frontline in 2002 that it's like, oh my God, y'all, there's this brain science happening that we now understand something about kids that we didn't understand before. There is a marked shift in how we think about how a brain develops and how a person matures and how they can think and take into account what is happening to them. So this huge shift has happened, and that is what gets us to the US Supreme Court, despite not really changing the people there, changing their minds and reaching a different conclusion. And that created this remarkable period of about 15 years where the US Supreme Court followed the rules of Second City improvisation, where every case that they got that had to do with a kid, they yes-anded it. They took what they said before and they built on it. And that was an amazing time. And the thing is, they were grounding all these decisions in this new understanding of the brain. And the thing is, they were doing a cutoff at the age of 18, but the science they were relying on had nothing to do with the age of 18. That science runs right up. Your brain is developing into the mid-20s, and I stand in front of you guys as a lifetime learner. That goes well beyond 25. I'm still doing things where it's like, why in God's name did you just say that? Like cursing in front of this room and on a Zoom. So there's always mistakes that we're making and we're learning from, but like there is this particular moment of cognition that is coming online that has, you're just not there when you're in your early 18, 19, 20-year-olds. The science shows that when you're in that population of 18 to 21, you're a whole lot more like a 13 to 17-year-old than you are like a 22 to 25-year-old. So the science is telling us something. And so what are we doing about it? So there, you know, everything that I was talking about in that Roper, Graham, Miller world of the US Supreme Court and the Eighth Amendment had to do with sentencing and like whether or not you could give somebody the death penalty, whether you could give a long sentence, but it expands outward because it's not just based on that. And so we started to push on this emerging adult population. And the Illinois Supreme Court started to recognize like, yeah, hey, maybe you can sort of rely on Miller and show us why you're more like a kid than you are like an adult. But the Illinois Supreme Court, when they giveth, they then taketh away. And they're now saying, hey, oh, well, yeah, sure, we said that. But Illinois has always provided greater protections to kids. Remember that reformatory I talked about in the late 1800s and early 1900s? So like we were cool, we got it then. So don't come to us now saying there's something new that should allow you to raise this claim, because Illinois has always been great to kids. Talk to me afterwards. I'll hand you the decisions where they looked at a case of, you know, like appellate court after appellate court looked at a 19-year-old who challenged their mandatory life sentence, and the court said like, well, the legislator said it's fine, so it's fine. So while maybe we're giving these greater protections, are they really there and in place? So we don't necessarily get to rely on our courts. We have to cross the street and look to the General Assembly. And there too, we are starting to see some of these steps forward. A few years ago, Illinois, while it had abandoned a system of parole, of second looks, back in the late 70s, We created a youthful offender parole system, and it didn't just apply to kids, it applied to individuals up to the age of 21. So we started to recognize, and some of the sponsors of that legislation talked on the floor about, like, you know, we've got a real big crystal ball problem when you've got a kid standing in front of you. You have no idea who they are going to be. And if, you know, talk to any of us, if we had a Wayback Machine, talk to you when you were 17, 18, I bet you it has nothing to do with where you are right now. Like, you were a good person, you were all great people. But, you know, I thought it's gonna be a fancy big time lawyer, like, you know, working in the tall buildings. That's not what I wanted. Like, when I actually figured out who I was and sort of what mattered to me, the idea of doing that wasn't even remotely a possibility because I didn't understand yet. I thought making money was what you were supposed to be doing, you know, like because they would pay. There's another huge change that happened recently too. There's this system that we have where we have a recidivist penological system where, like, if you've done things a number of times, we start to elevate your class of offense. If you've done a couple of class 1s and class 2s, we're now no longer going to treat you, if you pick up a new case, that way. We're going to punish you more harshly. Guess what? The General Assembly said, we're not going to start counting until you've picked up a case after your 21st birthday or when you've turned 21. Somebody in this room had a lot to do with that. Amy Campanelli, we appreciate forever that change. We have restorative justice courts now in Cook County, where we are looking at kids and we are looking at individuals up into their mid-20s. We're moving them out of this sort of the traditional criminal legal system and thinking about, how do we repair harm? How do we restore the individual? And how do we help the community? So we're going to hear more about restorative justice going forward, but know that we are looking at this population that, if you ever look at an age crime curve, like, we are right smack dab in the middle of it. Like, this is, if we're going to help this system, if we're going to change outcomes, this is the population that we need to be driving at and focusing on. So we need to keep pushing forward. We need to look to our sister states. We need to look to Vermont, that has raised the age of juvenile court to 21. They're not there yet, but they're going to. And it's this slow incremental change where they are not even willing to entertain the idea of, like, having a kid in adult court until they have reached a different age of maturity. We should look to Washington, D.C., California, that has second look legislation looking at sentencing for individuals up to the age of 25. Illinois hasn't done enough. We need to keep pushing forward. And we, of course, need to look to our allies, all of these sister communities in the international legal field that would look at the barbarism of some aspects of our system and wonder why you are doing this. If you're trying to get a different outcome, if you're trying to restore someone, why is it that you're waiting 8 years before you even go to trial? And then why is it that you're giving them 60 years when the most we could ever give someone is 20 or 30? Like, there's a very different way to think about it that, you know, you'll see when you look at the European model, and then when you look to how we treat individuals once they are incarcerated, you'll see a vast difference from how we treat people here in Illinois. So Jane Addams concludes that piece in the Ladies' Home Journal talking about the need to create a different system and a system that developmentally accounts for this population. So we're making some small changes in that direction. I think we need to keep our foot on the gas and keep pushing forward.
All right, Scott Main of the State Appellate Defender's Office, thank you. So next, we're going to look at an international movement to replace punitive forms of justice with restorative justice. Betsy, what time are we trying to end by altogether? We have 4 people left, right? We can go as long as we need to? Because I could also strictly enforce 10 minutes and we'd be done by 4. Like, what do we want? 12. Okay. All right. I'm going to rely on you to be a timekeeper if things are going way too long. All right. So replacing punitive forms of justice with restorative justice, an international movement. For this, we have Joshua Brooks. He works out of Adler University, and he is the Restorative Justice Hubs Coordinator in Chicago, and that is an effort by a number of organizations and entities. Joshua.
Thank you. Thank you. You guys would put time limits when I come up here now. He's coming up here. We got now. How's everybody? Well, I'm glad to see everyone. So glad to see everyone. So let me see. Let me get my notes out because I was taking some notes. So one of the things, restorative justice, I've heard people talk about like how it's very hard to define because there are so many different pockets of restorative justice. I think at the Republican National Convention, there was one person, this was a couple of years ago, they blamed restorative justice for the shootings, the mass shootings of elementary school, because and the way they defined it was that restorative justice is holding teachers accountable for what the youth do. And I'm like, that's not restorative justice, right? So, one of the things that I want to do, I just want to kind of help us to understand more about what truly is restorative justice, right? So, and I'll do it this way, right? So I just got my master's degree. I'm not going to tell you what the master's degree was in. Some of you already know. Don't say anything, right? But when I was in school, there were three names that I learned. There was Henry Fail, Frederick Taylor, and Max Weber. These three are known as the fathers of organizational management, right? And so Max Weber or Weber, we learn about bureaucracy, this term called bureaucracy. That's where it comes from. He's the one that kind of...
Democracy out of control online.
Right. So when you think about bureaucracy, that's what he was thinking about. He was thinking to himself, okay, if we have these organizations, there are different people who are put in place within these organizations that hold that power while they're in organizations and organizational structure, right? Bureaucracy. And then Henry Fail was like, okay, well, how do we manage people within these organizations, right? How do we manage people and ensure that people do exactly what they're supposed to do within these organizations and actually train people to be managers so that they can manage people? And then we have Frederick Taylor, right? And let me also start by saying this as well. These three came up during like what's called the progressive era. This was during the Industrial Revolution, when we were moving from textile and cotton to the cotton gin to production, right? This is when all of this stuff was happening. So Frederick Taylor was looking at time studies, like, if back in that era, the iPhone was created, they were looking at like, okay, let's observe to see how long does it take for a person or a couple of people on this assembly line to make this iPhone, right? I know you all are thinking like, what does this have to do with restorative justice? I'm gonna get to that, right? So Frederick Taylor did these like scientific studies to like look at time trials and see how long or how fast a product can be made. And so the industry, the manufacturing industry, the logistics industry at the time, the railroads and everything, in order to create products, they kind of like kind of pulled from these people of theory to be like, okay, this is how we can do it. This is how we can manage it. This is how we can advance it. This is how we can streamline it, right? Now, I just want to ask a question. I learned about that, getting my master's degree. What do you think I got my master's degree in? Wouldn't you think it might be business administration, right? Or industrial something, right? I learned that, get my master's in public administration. Public administration. Why am I learning about what was applied to industry and manufacturing in public administration, where people are being served? Isn't that crazy? I'm learning about what it takes to make this in public administration where people are served. And so what I also learned was that when it comes to the criminal justice system, when it comes to the juvenile justice system and all these systems that we have in place in public, and these are public administrative systems. Isn't it funny how when a young person is arrested, and let me get back to this. I also know a thing or two about manufacturing. Manufacturing is when you take raw material, whether it be metal, wood, and you put it through a process to create a product for mass distribution. That's all it is. It's not that complicated. The process of creating that product may be complicated, but it's when you take a product, a raw material, put it through a process to create something, a product for mass distribution. If you really look at our criminal justice system, the juvenile justice system, it's kind of funny to think about the product as the kids, right? Because once they're arrested, they go through this assembly line of these intersecting points. And then they go into they go to be arrested, they go into jail, and then, you know what? We expect for them to come out better than when they first came in. So I said that to say, this is what restorative justice is, all right? And I'm gonna use the words of a good friend of mine, Kathy Bankhead. Me and her and I, we co-keep circles together, and when she explains it, I'm like, that is the most beautiful way of explaining it, right? Restorative justice, a lot of people, and you know, I do give credit to those who are working in the system in order to, like the people who are working in the RJ courts, you know, the people who are working on diversion to try to ensure that kids don't go too further into the assembly line system. But here's something that she usually says. She says that, so say for instance, this room right here is a community. Everybody's in this community. We all are depending upon one another. We're all depending upon one another in order to eat, to live, to hunt, to gather, right? And then say for instance this, right? Say for instance, someone on this side, and they all of them are family, right? Say for instance, they did something wrong to someone on this side in this same community. And this community is like, you know what? That's not fair. That person should leave the community. And then that person leaves the community, but guess what? Their family and the whole side over there leaves the community too, right? Now think about hunter-gatherers, right? Like, because restorative justice is an indigenous practice. Restorative justice existed because there was no criminal justice system, right? So just think about this. This person leaves, their whole family leaves. Now they're outside of the community. But within the community, there are resources, there are tools, there are weapons, there are clothes, there's food, there's things, there's education. So you got this whole side of the family who just leaves, right? Because they've been X'd out because of what one person did wrong to harm somebody else. And because you got all of them, so now what happens? Because this side of the community got everything, the tools, the resources, everything they need. What do you think they're gonna do now that they're outside the community? They don't have any tools. They don't have any resources. What do you think they're gonna do? They're gonna look to where the resources are. So now this community is like, okay, we need people on watch. All of a sudden, they need people on watch because they fear that these people will come and take their resources. Come on, y'all. So now that thins out the resources for them because they never had nobody on watch. So now they need people on watch. They need people to have guns because they need to protect themselves from them because they don't have it, they're gonna try to get it some one way or another. But what if the person who did wrong on this side wasn't ostracized, wasn't removed from community? What if that person, and this goes into the question about like, what about the victims, right? You know, what if that person says, okay, what if the community says, you know what, let's see what happened. Let's get, not let's see what we can do to punish this person, but let's see what happened. Let's bring this person in and their family and everybody who we know because we need them. That's what restorative justice is. It's not just about repairing harm, but it's also about building relationships because you're less likely to harm someone you know. And this is, you know, and it's not all about circles either. So let me see, and I'm going to be short.
You're good.
Where am I on my time? So this goes into like, what can be done? What would Jane Addams say about this? And I think Jane Addams would be like, restorative justice. What is that? I think that's what I would tell. That's it, right? So what's happening now within the city of Chicago and in most places, what we're thinking about is restorative justice in a way where it's being brought back to community, because that's essentially where it started, in community. We see restorative justice being done in the courts. We see restorative justice being done in the schools. There was a recent article that talked about how restorative justice practices lowers suspensions and incidents and stuff like that, and that's great. But then you have those same young people. I've worked in schools for many years. You have those same young people who go back to their communities, go back to their homes, go back to those streets. And even in the courts, you have young people who are diverted, but they go back to the community, back to their homes, back to their streets. And so one of the things that I know I'm advocating for is that restorative justice definitely needs to be expanded within the community. Now, yeah, we do have restorative justice hubs, these organizations that's across the city that are doing a whole lot. New Life is working with new arrivals. They're also feeding community. Kenwood Oakland Community, I'm not going to go through the list of what everybody is doing, but they're doing a whole lot. And what I'm starting to see is that restorative justice is the most demanded thing in community, but it's the least funded. And that's an issue. It is the most demanded, it is the least funded. And so what I'm advocating is that there be an understanding of truly what restorative justice is, a definition of like, what does restorative justice mean in community? Like, and I know even the slide says that, restorative justice has been known to reduce recidivism. That's true, It does. But also if a person who exits out the criminal justice system and gets a job and is employed, that reduces recidivism too. So I'm advocating that, we do have organizations that's out there, restorative justice hubs and non-restorative justice hubs or other community organizations. And there is I'm making a plea that those who are funders, whether it be private or public, and I'm not saying this to try to raise up, any one organization, because I think that what's happening now is that we have a lot of people who train and do circle keeper training, but then follow up and implementation is really challenging. It's really challenging. I've trained a lot of people. I've trained people who are case managers, and then they'll go back to their organizations, and guess what they do? They keep doing case management. Because in order to do RJ, restorative justice takes a lot of time. So that's one of the things I'm really pulling for. I think that we can move towards a restorative city if there was more resources that will have people who are truly dedicated to restorative justice. And that's all they do, right? That's all they do. They can enhance the work of public defenders. They can enhance the work of advocates, of outreach workers, violence prevention, community, community CVI, community violence intervention. They can enhance all of the work that we do. But that's what I see regarding there be an expansion of restorative justice and there being a need for restorative justice to expand.
All right, Joshua Brooks, coordinator of Restorative Justice Hubs in Chicago. Thank you. So we're going to look at an international movement now. It's to replace, we've already done this international movement. We're going to look at something else. We're going to look at a movement to use the state's community colleges as alternatives for kids in conflict with the law. We have Courtney Carson. Come on up, Courtney. The Assistant Vice President of External Affairs of Richland Community College in Decatur. He has also served as the college's Essential Skills Director. Courtney, take it away.
Amen. Thank you so much, JJI. Give yourselves a round of applause, amen. Sorry, I'm a preacher. I work for God, so I'm gonna say a lot of amens. Is that all right?
Sure thing.
Amen. What would Jane Addams say? I'm gonna ask the question before you ask me that question. I just believe that James Addams would be on the cutting edge. I think she'd say to like Moses, she would say, let God's children go. I think she'd be on the cutting edge, fed up, and she would say to the pharaohs of the 13th and the 21st century, let God's children go. I think she would march on Washington and say to the White House, let God's children go. I think she would say to the juvenile justice system and those who own all the multimedia outlets, let God's children go. Because of those media outlets, our babies glorify the very things that are designed to destroy them. I think that Jane Addams would be simply fed up and on the cutting edge and saying to this nation, let God's children go. I was reading, because I'm intrigued by the museum my first time here, I was reading the 1968 Kerner Commission report. And it reads, what white Americans have never fully understood, but what the Negro can never forget, is that white society is deeply implicated in the ghetto. White institutions created it, white institutions maintain it, and white society condones it, end quote. See, the system ain't broken. It's doing exactly what it's meant to do. But really, who am I to speak to that? Because I'm not from the ghetto or the hood. I'm from a jungle called Greenwood. It's a project. And in Greenwood, you're confined by project walls. See, in the ghetto or the hood, when they start shooting, you can run across the street. But in Greenwood, you can't. You can only duck. You can only hide. I was the youngest of 5 children. My brothers and sisters, they knew their father. I didn't know mine. He don't claim me to this day. I was introduced to the Black Pea Stone Nation at the age of 8. I sold my first dope at the age of 11. That same summer, my 17-year-old cousin shot at me, and so I had no other choice but to shoot back. But when I shot, I hit him. Today, he's in a wheelchair. By the age of 15, I had my first child. By the age of 18, I had my second. That same year, I was expelled out of high school for a football fight, a 17-second football fight. If I had not been for people like you in my life and Reverend Jesse Jackson, I don't know where I would be today. The newspaper said I was the big bad wolf of Decatur. I felt inadequate. I felt dumb, ignorant, and stupid. I was a young man reading about how terrible I was, so I felt like I had no future. But one day I decided to go to college. I went on a field trip with Reverend Jackson, 36 colleges around the country. And I said, my God, I can do this. So he gave me a scholarship, and I went on to school. Some of my favorite people, I was gonna say their names because I'm that blunt, told me that I wouldn't make it. They said because I had tattoos already, that in 5 years, I'd be in prison. But I did make it. In the same newspaper that said that I was the big bad wolf of Decatur, 15 years later coined me as the most influential African American in Central Illinois. Not only that, graduated with a 3.2. I can learn. Amen. My sister in the back with the beautiful fro, you know what education do. Amen. So then I decided, because in the city of Decatur, we were convicting at a rate about 85%, graduating at a rate about 64%, maybe I should do something about that. So I ran for the school board. And folks said, you ain't gonna get there. They won't elect you. I said, my God, you might be right. But I ran anyhow. And then I was elected to the school board. The same school board that expelled me. The same two individuals that kicked me out of school had to watch individuals swear me in. Ain't that poetic justice? Amen. Then Netflix start calling. We're still on our second conversation because you know Reverend Jackson's involved in this story, so they want to do a story, amen. If he would just give them his naming rights, we'd be all right. We can get this thing across the finish line. But however, was on the school board, done some remarkable work. And you know, when you're an elected official, my elected official brother, I know you understand. People sometimes want you to be the civil rights leader on the school board, but I'm on the school board to govern policy. So I had to do it in a sneaky kind of way. And I created this resolution on racism. And in the resolution on racism, I was doing my finest work. And do you believe, watch this, and I'm gonna get to the point, because I'm a Black Baptist preacher, you know how we are. You give us a time limit, it's like kryptonite. I got 5 more minutes. I think I got 5 more minutes. Raise your hand if I can have 5 more minutes of your time. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. I got 30 more minutes now. Thank you. Amen. So the community where I sold dope at and ran the organization, I was able to put a $30 million school in that community. And not only that, my good friend Howard Buffett gave me $13 million to renovate that community at the same time. And so that's some phenomenal work. But then I said to myself, because I finally got a good paying job at the institution, the community college. And you know, sometimes it's so sad to me when I see those of us who come through all the hell and the trials and the tribulation that we go through, get to a place in our life where we forget where we come from. And maybe it's because people began to make it look like we're important. But because we sometimes forget where we come from, we essentially forget what's needed for the next generation of young people. So when I began my work at Richland Community College, I said we need a workforce training for people that come through the same kind of hell that I've come through. And they said, okay, that's good, we can do that. And let's give them some life skills. I said, well, no, it's deeper than that. We have to couple life skills with job skills and 2 trauma-sensitive practice term motivational interviewing and the circle of courage that indigenous people have been utilizing for 17 generations. And so not just teaching babies a skill, but teaching them how to balance and regulate their adverse childhood experiences and those triggers that tranquilize their growth and development. And so we did that. And since 2016, we have serviced 2,167 individuals. Out of the 2,167 babies, young people and adults, 91% graduated. 90% are employed today after a 6-month follow-up. 55% are second chance citizens, directly impacted citizens. Some people just simply say felon. And 100% of the 55 are at work today out of our program. And also in our program, it's called Enrich. We've produced, because we got an issue in the city of Decatur where there's not many Black-owned businesses. And if you know me, we got to chum something like Jane Addams. We're gonna change that narrative. Our program, we have a minority mentor protege program where we have produced 42 businesses, 19 owner-operators. Amen. 3 of our owner-operators are making $5,000 a week. 1 of them making $15,000 a week. That's something to be proud about. But not only that, I said that ain't enough. So we created this thing called the PrEP program. And the PrEP program target at-risk young babies and young people in the DPS 61 who's been through some things and been through the criminal system. We meet them in the 8th grade. And by the 9th grade, they don't just go into the Decatur public schools, they enter into Richland Community College as well. By the time those babies graduate high school, they walk across that stage with an associate's degree. And it's free. They don't have to pay anything. Amen. That's all right, isn't it? So our programs for their mothers, and I'm a little, you know, I'm strategic. I was gonna say stinky, but I ain't gonna use that word. I'm strategic because the same young people that we identify, then we go get their parents. And we offer their parents a 12-week program where we pay them $12 a week, $12 an hour, 40 hours a week. And we allow them to receive a nationally recognized certification, whether it's CDL or welding or whatever the situation may be, and offer them an additional 6 nationally recognized certifications so that they can become much more employable. And it's magnificent that they learn the same trauma-sensitive practices that their baby's learning. So when they're at home together, they know how to create a cohesive, they know how to fusion and interact with one another like humans. And I just thank God for these particular programs. I thank God for the work that you do, because this work looks like heaven. And I just thank God whenever I see any white folk who are willing to help all of us, and white folks and black folks working together, men and women working together, college organizations and men's organizations and women organizations working together. When you see Jews and Gentiles and Christians and Baptists and Protestants and the Ark fellas and Masons all working together, then we can finally say, free at last. Free at last. Thank God Almighty. We have come together and we are free at last. Amen. Thank you so much.
Courtney Carson of Richland Community College in Decatur. Thanks a lot. All right, we have our two last speakers are going to look at trends in legal assistance for children in trouble with the law. First is Amy Campanelli. She's Vice President of Restorative Justice at Lawndale Christian Legal Center in Chicago. Before that, she was Cook County's public defender. She headed the whole office. She's going to talk about rights of children during interrogation. Are you good there?
I just want to do. Oops. Okay. First of all, now you made me follow the preacher. Okay, very unfair, Betsy. But it's amazing what one human being can do for their community. Unbelievable. Just to be in the same room with Reverend Carson, really, and hear his story. And you know, I woke up this morning, I wasn't gonna go off topic, but I have to go off topic, because I woke up thinking about standing at the Henry Horner Homes. It was 1990. I was there at 7 o'clock in the morning. I was investigating a serious crime. I had a client, I don't remember how old my client was, but I was investigating a serious crime, and it was 7 o'clock in the morning. None of the elevators worked, of course. We had to walk up at least 7 flights of stairs to try and find a witness, knocking on doors. It was the most horrific place you could ever see. There was, you know, trash everywhere. It smelled horribly on every level. When I came down the stairs, I saw a young child, obviously talking to an older person, but obviously dealing drugs. I saw money change hands, and I went out. I'll never forget this. I was dreaming this morning. I went out, and there was an open space between the buildings, right? And there was no grass. There was no playground. It was dirty, and there was a woman there, and she was definitely not even 18, and she had 5 children with her. She was holding the baby, and she had 4 little ones. And that's where they were playing. They were playing in a horribly place that would not be for any child you would want to play in, right? And I was thinking to myself as I walked away with my investigator, thinking those children are going to be my clients. Not even a thought in my mind. Every single one of those children is going to be my client someday as a young public defender that I was at that time. And, you know, when I think about my life and when I was a child, and I'll just tell one more anecdotal story. When I was 8, I went to Catholic school in an all-white suburb, Western Springs, Illinois, and the Catholic Archdiocese, right? I was a Catholic. It was 1970, and they had a program to integrate the school, right? 1970, we're coming off the civil rights era. And for some reason, my mother took me to the meeting. It was full of parents in the gym, and other parents had children there, and the priests and the nuns were on the stage. There was at least 300 or 400 people in the gym. And the priest announced, Father Bennett, he was the head of the school, he said, this is a new program. We are going to be busing the Black children in from the south and west sides of Chicago, and we're going to integrate them so they can get a Catholic education because they don't have a Catholic school near them. They don't have that opportunity to learn about Catholic religion and learn about Jesus in the Catholic faith. And I remember it as if it was yesterday. A man stood up right in front of us, right? And he said, if you bring those, and he used a word I'd never heard, into this school, I am taking my family out. And other people started to jump up and say the same thing. And my mother, with her friggin' flaming red hair, stood up and she said, shame, shame on you. And more than that, I remember when we went to the car after the meeting and she pulled me really hard, I remember, and she turned me around and she said, Amy, did you see what happened in there? That was hate. Don't you ever let me see you hate like that. Our house got egged that night by parents lost friends who probably shouldn't have been their friends. And those children, right? This is K through 8, 5-year-olds through 12 and 13-year-olds who were already hated when you didn't even know them, never even met them, but a room full of white people hated them already, were in my class, and the valedictorian of my 8th grade class was one of those children. And my best friend was one of those children. And those children stayed at our house on the weekends. Because if they wanted to play basketball on Fridays, or they wanted to be on the volleyball team, or be a cheerleader, they couldn't get the bus home on Friday. So they had to have families take care of them. And that's what Father Bennett was talking about. We need families to sponsor them. That's the kind of life I grew up. Those are the parents I had. I was lucky. Right? I had parents who cared about social justice, who cared about children and treating every child, no matter the color of their skin, equally, right? So when I think of what Jane Addams would say, she would say, of course, never give up. Never give up on a child. That's ridiculous. Relentless engagement. My executive director, Cliff Nellis, says that all the time. Relentlessly engage with these children, no matter how many times they screw up, no matter how many times they misbehave. You continue to engage them and do what we need to do to get them on the path so they can live their dreams and their hopes and up to their potential. And Jane Addams would say that no child, right, should ever be left alone in a room with law enforcement officers in a locked room to be able to defend themselves against, most likely, it's never one law enforcement officer, it's always 2, and they're always detectives, so they've been law enforcement for 25, 30 years, so 50 years experience law enforcement against this little 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 15-year-old, 18-year-old, 21-year-old. They're children, right? So I'll get back to my PowerPoint. And I bring up, here's Miller. This is what Scott was talking about, right? The great United States Supreme Court, right? What did they say? Justice Elena Kagan, another champion for us, stated, children are constitutionally different from adults. Their lack of maturity, underdeveloped sense of responsibility lead to recklessness, impulsivity, heedless risk-taking. They are more vulnerable to negative influences and outside pressures, including from their family and their peers. They have limited control over their own environment, and they lack the ability to extricate themselves, to go walk away from these horrific crime-producing settings. It's not rocket science. That's brain science. But what Courtney was saying isn't rocket science. What he's doing, it's not something we haven't thought about. It just takes courage and help and all of us together to put these programs in place. So if juveniles are constitutionally different, according to the United States Supreme Court since 2010, then their interrogation should be different. Juveniles should not be treated the same as adults, but of course we know that isn't true. Prior to 2000, now I'm only going back 23 years, you guys. Prior to 2000, Illinois law did not provide at all any statutory right for a juvenile to have a lawyer with them in the room when they were being interrogated. Then in July of 2000, the Juvenile Court Act was amended to guarantee counsel during custodial interrogation for a minor, only those under 13. Right? It was something, okay? And remember, 12-year-olds and 11-year-olds and 10-year-olds really aren't doing a lot of crime, okay? But if you're 13 and up, you don't get a lawyer. And even if you're under 13, you only get a lawyer if you're charged with homicide or a sex-related offense. You know, again, it's that give and take you have to do with legislators to get a law passed. So then starting in 2017, finally, Betsy and I and many other advocates, when I was the public defender, worked on getting the law amended again. We wanted lawyers, right, for everyone under 18. We didn't get it. We testified at Senate hearings, but what did we do get? Any minor under 15 during a custodial interrogation has a right to a lawyer. Again, only on homicide or sex cases. So why do children in custody need lawyers? Like me or anyone. Why do we need a lawyer? Well, you already heard Veronica talk about the Waukegan case. Just last year, right? You have a 15-year-old Martell. He's arrested at a school. They come into school and arrest him, handcuff him in school in front of the whole school. First trauma of the day for him. Take to the police station for questioning about a shooting of a dollar store clerk. His mother was not contacted. They never called her, even though that's the law and has been the law since the 1960s. The offender had been wearing a ski mask and no positive identification could ever be made. Like there's no way anyone was ever going to identify the person who committed this crime because the person was wearing a mask, right? But that didn't matter. Martell was interrogated until he confessed. He wasn't leaving that room with those detectives of 50 years experienced monks until he signed and gave a confession, signed it and gave it in videotape. And we've seen some of the videotapes, they published them. And the family, of course, had to go out and prove that he was obviously at a high school basketball game when the crime occurred. A lawsuit is now pending. Now, let me remind you folks, we have spent over $1 billion since 2004 on Chicago police misconduct case. That's just Chicago, right? That includes all police misconduct, including wrongful confessions, wrongful interrogations, wrongful convictions, but also other police misconduct like excessive force and things like that. It's a lot of money. Imagine what we could do with $1 billion for our communities. So here's another story that all of you remember. In 1998, right? 11-year-old girl, Ryan Harris, was sexually assaulted and killed. 2 prepubescent boys, ages 7 and 8, confessed. They arrested them and confessed after questioning. 7 and 8 years old. They could never have assaulted anyone, not physically capable of doing that crime. Later, the DNA test exonerated them and identified a 30-year-old man as the murderer. They were fed hamburgers. The police held hands with them. told them, you know what the difference is between a good boy and a bad boy and stuff like that. I mean, hours and hours, and it probably didn't take long. I don't know all the facts, but it wouldn't take long to get a 7 and 8 year old who was promised that they were going to go home if they just signed this piece of paper. Because everybody thinks the police tell them the truth. You wouldn't stand 5 minutes in a police station. You wouldn't be able to stand an hour in a police station. None of us. I wouldn't be able to withstand 2 detectives standing over me, telling me to do something, because I would believe them when they would tell me I was going to go home, because that's what happens. And the third study, let's remind ourselves about what happened in 1989 with 5 young teenagers when a Central Park jogger was killed in Central Park, a white woman. And of course, the 5 usual suspects that were brought in were 5 young black and brown children. 2 were 14, there was 1 15, and I think 2 were 16. Of course, they had no lawyer during the interrogation, but a lot of them had their parents there, right, with them. And guess what some of the parents said? And you should watch this documentary. It's called Central Park 5. Go ahead. When they see us, it's called.
When they see us, no matter who knows all about all this stuff, you've got to watch
It is When They See Us, one of the best documentaries, and it shows what many of the lawyers in this room know who have dealt with these cases and read police reports and read transcripts and talked to our clients know these things happen, right? And they still are happening, right? So they made the confession. Several had their parents. They were all convicted at trial, even though they tried to get their confessions thrown out. And they all served most of their time, 7 to 13 years in prison. And of course, in 2001, they find the serial rapist named Mr. Reyes, who confesses to the rape, claims he was the only actor. And of course, he was the only actor because he was the only one whose DNA was found on the jogger who was raped and murdered. So what do these cases tell us? And every case that Herschella and me and Scott and Patrick dealing with and Laura dealing with in court every day, right? What do they tell us? Law enforcement officers, including youth officers, who is just a glorified name of a police officer, they do not protect children's rights, and they never have. Not in Illinois anyway. They seek to obtain a confession. They are not there to protect the rights of the child. That is their goal, to make sure they that they get the confession. Promises, isolation, deception, threats, intimidation, manipulation are all used to obtain a confession, and it's perfectly proper under the law. And minors, of course, as you know, are much more vulnerable to these actions than adults. But I would say that adults too. Are no match for law enforcement when you're in that room. You're just not gonna be able to unless the police follow the law and you say, I want my lawyer. And of course, which is the first thing you should ever say, not that any of you are getting arrested soon, but if you are, I want a lawyer and I will not speak to you without a lawyer, right? First thing, just giving you some advice today. But, and parents are not protection against police questioning. Parents do not understand legal rights or how to invoke their constitutional protections for their child. And parents also believe the police. And they believe the police are there to help them, right? And people are afraid of the police, right? So they will say whatever the police want. So how do we change the narrative to the horrible history of interrogations of children, emerging adults in our country, right? How do we do that? Well, after Laquan McDonald was killed, I was the public defender. It'd been like 6 months since I was a public defender. And it was recognized all over Chicago that we got to do something here, right? Like, really? The light bulb finally went off? We have to do something? We've already spent millions of dollars on police misconduct cases. We have to change the culture in all respects. And one of those changes was to provide lawyers at the station house, right? So after advocacy with advocates like JJI and other advocates came with me, people who'd done the research, like from University of Chicago, Northwestern, we had been meeting with Judge Evans, and everybody had said, public defenders need to be at police stations. You need lawyers. That's the only way we can hold police accountable. We've talked about accountability today. How do you hold police accountable when they mess up, right? When they don't follow the law? Well, we can be at the station. We can watch them. We can stop them from violating people's rights. So in March of 2017, Chief Judge Evans, an incredibly courageous man, entered an order that when an unrepresented person, all persons, every age, including juveniles, requests legal representation, the public defender office was deemed appointed. And if you don't know the law, you don't get a lawyer, right? A lawyer is never deemed appointed to represent anyone except in court, right? Now that's too late, right? I've already been in a police station 3 days. Now I go to court and I get a lawyer? You know, they've already abused me, they've locked me up, they've isolated me, they've made me freeze to death for 3 days, they didn't let me see my parents, my lawyer showed up, and they didn't even let my lawyer in the door, very common. I sued the Chicago police because they did that during the protests, and I sent lawyers to police stations and they still didn't let them in, so I had to sue the Chicago police for that. But so he said, after many people worked together and talked to Judge Evans, he said, okay, I'm gonna appoint you in the police station. They have to still ask for a lawyer, but you can go to the police station and it's as if you were appointed in court at the police station. And what a difference did that make? What a difference. And there are lots of people who have studies, you know, that 1% of the people in custody of the police have representation. Maybe now it's more like 5%. It's going up, but it's something, okay? It's something. So whenever they contact us, the family or the person calls from the station. So, and Judge Evans' order, of course, is only for Cook County. So what about the rest of the state and quite frankly, the rest of the nation? So in 2021, during when we were all working on the Safety Act together, which of course the Pretrial Fairness Act, the bond reform is part of the Safety Act, we looked at changing some laws that we knew needed existence. And we tried to change the narrative and we did. So I don't know if any of you know this, but since the 1960s, we've had great laws on our books. The people of Illinois, the legislature of Illinois knew during the civil rights era that laws needed to be changed because police have power. And when police have power, they abuse that power, right? So the good people of Illinois in 1965 wrote a law saying that when you are in custody of the police, you have a right to medical attention, you have a right to food, you have a right to shelter, you have a right to a reasonable number of phone calls within a reasonable time of your arrest. Unfortunately, the police thought that was it's never a reasonable time for a phone call, as we know, because now it's 2023. And you have a right to not only communicate with a family member and a lawyer. That was one of the rights. The second right was you have a right to consult with an attorney in a private room, and it can't be eavesdropped and you can't be recorded. These have been the laws on the books, you guys, since 1965. And guess what the other law was? That posters in large conspicuous writing that tell people what their rights are have to be in every room where someone is held in detention. Do you think any law enforcement officer in the state of Illinois ever did that? Did you think in the interrogation room there was ever a poster up where I could read, oh, I have a right to communicate with a lawyer. Oh, I have a right to never happened. Nobody was ever held accountable for it. And guess what? The last part of the law was if the law enforcement willfully violates any of these laws, meaning doesn't give you a reasonable number of phone calls, doesn't put the poster up, doesn't feed you, doesn't shelter you, doesn't allow you to communicate with a lawyer who shows up at the police station, it's a class 3 felony for the law enforcement, whoever's in charge of that station. Do you think anybody has ever been prosecuted in the state of Illinois for not following that? Any police officer? No, of course not. What prosecutor is going to prosecute a police commander who doesn't put up the poster or doesn't get phone calls? So again, a law with no repercussions. So I knew that. So we went with the Safety Act and we changed the law. And now under the Safety Act, a person has all those same rights that I just told you, but now they have a right to communicate within 3 hours. I wanted 1 hour. I fought so hard for 1 hour. But we couldn't get it with all the other people who helped me. 3 hours within arrival at the police station. Within 3 hours, you have a right to at least 3 phone calls within 3, and you get to look at your phone. They don't get to take your phone from you anymore. So, because I might not know my grandmother's phone number off by heart. I might not know the public defender 24/7 number, right? I get to look at my phone and pull off the phone numbers. These are things, it's not rocket science, right? I have a right to call people. You can't hold me incommunicado because you've arrested me. You're supposed to be protecting my rights, law enforcement officer. That's their job. They are to protect the rights of the citizens that they arrest, that they detain, that they communicate with. Whoever thought that the police were not supposed to protect people's rights? Right? The police do. Nobody's held them accountable. They've gotten away with it for decades and decades. So why would they ever think they have to protect anyone's rights? Well, now we have changed the law. And any statements that someone gives, I probably yelled too loud, but any statements that anyone makes in custody where they have not received phone calls within 3 hours is presumed inadmissible in court, right? It is still a class 3 felony. Still, that did not get taken out. We just added things. We didn't take anything out. I made sure of that. And the posters. Now the posters not only have to say exactly what your rights are in every room where someone's held in detention, except the lockup. In the lockup, which are for after they've already, arrested you and processed you, you go to lockup. But all the interrogation rooms. Think about at a jewel store, if they have an interrogation room where a theft deterrent officer is sitting. That poster better be up in that jewel or that Target if they have theft detention, because they're law enforcement. Any room in any place where someone is held in custody has to have the posters, has to have the 3 phone calls within 3 hours. And now, if there's a public defender office that will represent you and come to the station, the phone number of that public defender or nonprofit or whatever has to also be posted. Okay? So that's the current law. So go ahead, Mark. Right. I think it's, I printed all the posters when I realized after I got the police station unit in 2017, and I met with 75 chiefs of police, one-on-one in the suburbs, and I met with all 22 police commanders in the city of Chicago, and they didn't have the posters. I made the posters. I brought the posters with me. I brought the big ones, and I brought smaller ones, but I brought them because I wasn't going to trust them to make posters, right? And I had the public defender phone number. This is before the new law that just passed. I had it in English, Spanish, and Polish. So, quite frankly, I remember going to Maywood and he had the poster, but he only had it in one of his interrogation rooms, or he had it just in the main room where they sit 6 or 7 people they've just arrested and everybody's handcuffed to the wall. They might have a poster there, but it has to be seen. Let me tell you one story. I went after I was giving the posters and telling the police about the police station unit, and please call us. We're not here to stop you from investigating your cases. We're here to help you bring trust to the police. I bring trust to you. When you call me and let me in, that makes people feel good about the police because the police are following the law. Guess what? When you don't violate people's rights, people trust you. People will talk to you about crimes. They will help you investigate crimes. Again, not rocket science. So then I went up to the second floor at Area 1, which they have several interrogation rooms, and quite frankly, most of the juveniles who are arrested in the city of Chicago are interrogated in Area 1, because that's the largest detective division in Chicago. And they said they had put the posters up, so I went to check. I went up there with Detective Dinahan, who is, as you know, been second in charge of Chicago Police for many years now. And he had the poster. Sure, it was on the outside of the door. The clients are on the inside of the room, and it was bolted down. This is how far they will go. Bolted down under plastic with big silver. And he goes, "Well, Amy, I can't put it up." And I think he called me Miss Campanelli. "I can't put it inside the room. They'll tear it down." I go, "You gotta be kidding me. It's behind 3 feet of like glass with these big steel things. They're never gonna pull it off the wall. Change it, because that's not the law. They're not sitting out here in the little area." So anyway, again, tough road, but we change in the narrative, right? The recording of statements, right? In 2017, Illinois has required that all statements that children make under 18 must be videotaped, right? And that's for any felony and a misdemeanor sex offense. So not any crime, not a criminal trespass to land or something like that, which isn't a misdemeanor sex offense. And they are, if you do not record, and every single minute of that recording with the officer questioning the youth and the youth answering and whatever's happening in the room, if it's not recorded, the statements are presumed inadmissible in court. Miranda warnings, simplified Miranda warnings. They didn't go nearly as far as we wanted, as many of the people in this room know, but they are simplified. You know, they have to tell the young person Miranda warnings in a different way, like you have the right to remain silent. That means, young child, that you do not have to say anything, right? Imagine talking to a 13-year-old saying you have the right to remain silent. Do you think a 13-year-old understands what that means? No, that means you don't have to say anything to me, right? And anything you do say can be used against you in court. You have the right to get help from a lawyer, right? That's a different way of saying Miranda. And if you cannot pay for a lawyer, the court will get you one for free. You can ask for a lawyer at any time. You have the right to stop this interview at any time. So the Miranda warnings were changed. And then they're asked, do you want to have a lawyer? And do you want to talk to me? And again, remember, this all has to be videotaped. So if I see a videotape, I'm watching it, and that young person is not asked those Miranda questions in that way, and exactly as written, I can get that statement suppressed if my client then gives a videotape statement later, right? That statement is presumed inadmissible. Now, children in other nations, this is really you, Betsy, but, you know, that I didn't know about, but Betsy brought this to my attention. When you're detained in police custody, this is the law from, you know, the European Court of Human Rights. They should, in principle, be accompanied by their parent, legal guardian, or other appropriate adult. Of course, to me, that really isn't good. Of course, you want your parents to be notified and know that you're at a police station if you're a child. But they should also have the right of access to a lawyer and a doctor. So as long as that right to a lawyer is there, it's good. Parents are not helpful. They don't know the law. They're not lawyers. They will not protect their child's rights. Again, I'm speaking in general. There certainly have been parents who have protected their child's rights. So what about the future? This is what I ask all of you. What should we do in the future? All children under the age of 18 should have an attorney provided to them from the moment custodial interrogation begins, right? That's what we want. Everyone under 18, no matter what you're charged with. Just because I'm charged with a homicide or a sex case or a simple battery or, you know, a burglary to a car, I should need a lawyer. You need a lawyer. That's it. You should have the right, constitutional right to a lawyer. But should you have a lawyer from the moment they are interrogated? Think about this. Children are questioned on the street. They're questioned in the police car. Is that custodial? I'd say a police car is. But let's say I'm questioned, you know, 2 police cars pull up and they start questioning me and I'm coming out of an alley. You know, what is that? That might not be custodial, right? They haven't handcuffed me. There's really not maybe a show of force. Custody is a requirement. But shouldn't I have a right to a lawyer before I say something to a police officer, even if I'm not in custody? Yeah, you should, right? I think, you know, police as easily can talk to a child, you know, in a non-custodial situation, they can call a lawyer. That's it. Is it immediate? You know, there could be exceptions, right? They're trying to solve a crime. Someone just got shot. You walk up to a 15-year-old on the street. Did you see where they went? Did you see the person run away? I understand that. We can't impede investigations. But if you're going to talk to a young person and ask any question at all that could be incriminating, they have a right to a lawyer. And like I said, from the moment they're questioned or from the moment they're a suspect, right? These are all different intercepts where you could get lawyers. And of course, we have to have the resource to have the lawyers go to the police station. And we have the lawyers going to the police stations now. And then the other thing I think is law enforcement must notify the attorney. Don't put it on the onerous of the child or the child's family or anybody that's, you know, the law enforcement, the minute they take a child into custody, they should have to call the public defender's office or a nonprofit or whoever is going to be going to a police station and say, I have a child in custody. He just arrived within an hour. He's here at the District 10. And then you go to the police station, you protect their rights. So that's what I think should be done in the future. I don't know how the rest of you do, but consider what a just system for a minor would look like. Everything would be transparent, right? We do have transparency. We have body-worn cameras. We have dash cameras. We have pod cameras. We see what the police are doing. All contact with a minor would be recorded to prevent improper or intimidating conduct, and minors would be, every minor, I don't know how to say minor, every child would be guaranteed counsel. In other words, like I started with, the justice system would recognize that children are constitutionally different from adults.
All right, Amy Campanelli, Lawndale Christian Legal Center. One more speaker, a good one, Patrick Keenan Devlin. He's going to talk about holistic advocacy around detention and sentencing. He's executive director of the Moran Center for Youth Advocacy in Evanston. He worked previously as health policy advocate for the Sergeant Shriver National Center on Poverty Law. And he was, before that, legislative director of Citizen Action. Thank you.
Okay, so I realize it is 4:20 and we should be landing the plane by now. I am the speaker, I think, that's supposed to make you really earn, attorneys, your CLEs today. And I want to be respectful of time. So what I probably will do is fly through these and just ask JJI to send out maybe PowerPoints at the end so you all can maybe discern a little bit more and process the information a little bit more than what I'm going to have time for today. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes as we're wrapping up today, as Amy mentioned in her remarks, that some of us are in the field, working within the system each and every day as attorneys. And so we talked a lot about today, and you heard from some of those brilliant minds, and I really do mean that, in our state, about the system, envisioning a new system, reforming a system, and we attorneys are still working in the current system. And so we have to think about, how do we keep kids out of jail? And how do we keep them out of incarceration? So first topic, challenging pretrial detention. How do we do it as attorneys? So first off, there are 3 elements to the standard of whether a child should be detained in the state of Illinois. And the Juvenile Court Act gives 3. First, the safety of the minor. Second, the safety of others, the person and property. And then the minor's likelihood to flee. So before detaining a child, the court has to take all of those into consideration. Now, the next element that the Juvenile Court Act outlines is all of the other factors that should help the court discern detention, okay? And I'm gonna open it up because I don't want you to fall asleep. What is one of those factors that the court is required under the Juvenile Court Act to take into consideration before detaining a child? One of them. Age. Good. What's another one? Just think. Come on. I know you all know. I'll give you another one just to grease the wheels. Seriousness of the offense, right? Seriousness of the offense. What about minor's record? Okay, it's another one. And their record of appearing before the court, okay? And their availability of alternatives to incarceration. So the court's supposed to take that all into consideration before detaining a child pretrial. There you go. There's the statute, and I didn't read it to you. You're welcome. Pop quiz. Juvenile Court Act. Don't open it on your phones. Is there a preference in the Juvenile Court Act against detention? Yes or no? Yes, you are correct. It actually is right up in the front. Right up, it's like one of the first damn sentences in the Juvenile Court Act. We prefer for children to be in their home. And the General Assembly prefers because it's for the betterment of the child and the community. I can't tell you how often I go to court in these, what, in Cook County we call them urgent and immediate necessity hearings. I can't tell you how often I'm standing there and I don't hear lawyers shout this from the rooftop. I mean, this is the preamble of the Juvenile Court Act. We should be, as lawyers, citing this every time we're in front of a judge. Judge, it's in the first paragraph. We have to prefer for children to be at home. So I am really proud to run the Moran Center, which is a community-based legal aid organization in Cook County, based in the city of Evanston. And we have a holistic defense model where we have mental health professionals, lawyers, restorative justice practitioners, all working together to support children and their families. And Louise said at one point, duh, it's what we should be doing when we're supporting children and families, particularly going through this incredibly broken system. We need to be holistic. And I get it that many of my brothers and sisters in the front lines don't have that holistic approach. And so I preach as often as I can, even if you don't have a social work degree, lawyers, especially if you're a juvenile defender, try your damnedest to think like a social worker and to understand child development, and to then fight to get the resources so you have a social worker. Because I would argue it is nearly malpractice for juvenile defenders to practice in the courts of the United States without a holistic defense team supporting them. And I do think that has to be a point of advocacy for us as a wider community, to advocate that every child has a holistic defense team. So when I am training other lawyers locally, but also across the country, I urge them to, in these pretrial detention challenge postures, to talk to their client. And I realize that in the field, we have not much time, right? Because the judge is saying, I got my golf game in an hour. Let's go, counsel, let's move. And we as lawyers have to be firm, polite, but firm, and say, Judge, I need a little more time, and hold your ground. Take your time. Take your time and ask children to be part of your advocacy. Talk to them about, what is it that they like to do? Who supports them? What do they like to do after school? What are their interests? What is their health history? Make them part of your advocacy. That's what I think we should be doing as lawyers. And I'll tell you that if you have a social worker standing right next to you, they're going to hold you accountable as the lawyer to make sure that you are asking these questions, that you're involving the child in your advocacy. It's so important. You got to talk to the family. You got to talk to the family. Here's a quick story about that. I had a grandmother who I thought was willing to take her grandson home. Went up to grandmother before I walked up to the bench, said, Grandma, are you willing to take your grandson home? She said, hell no, I don't want to take him home. I don't want to take him home. And I remember I think I'm still a young lawyer, but I was a really young lawyer then. I was like, oh, crap. I didn't expect her to say that. And so then I asked for a break. I put grandmother in one room. My kid was already in a locked room. And we started going back and forth between the parties. And we mediated. We actually created an agreement that grandma could live with, that the grandson could live with. And then when we went in front of the judge, we said, okay, grandma's willing to take him home under these conditions, Your Honor. That made her feel a lot better, and it got the kid out of custody. So yeah, as juvenile defenders, we have to be really creative. We have to be mediators. We have to be social workers. Let's also, again, advocate for mediators and social workers to work alongside us so we're not the sole keeper of all of that knowledge, because you can't be an expert in everything. But that is the story, that is the work that we are, I think, obligated to engage in. You got to talk to other people to get a kid out of detention. You got to talk to probation officers. You got to convince them that this is the right outcome to get the kid out of jail. You got to talk to teachers. Yeah, and sometimes you got to talk to the state. You got to talk to them. I can't tell you how often I am able to convince state attorneys to stand down and take a step back and say, hey, don't challenge me when I ask for this kid to get out. And let me tell you why you shouldn't challenge me. So this is the advocacy we have to engage in. I always tell particularly young attorneys, pull out your statute book, have these factors in front of you, and be ready to address each and every one of them. So when you're standing in front of that judge, you can go, Judge, I have thought of this, I have thought of that, I have thought of this, and that is why you have to let this kid out, because I have met the statutory standards for review and why this kid should be allowed out of detention. Think about everything. Make a release plan with the child, centering the child. Think about all the other options that your community has that you can argue in front of the court that is an alternative to detention, and be ready to address that in front of a court. And then, as I said, talk to everybody and get folks in the room, in the courtroom, advocating right alongside you. Again, I'm not going to go through all this because I don't have time, because I want to be respectful of your time. But this is the method that we use at the Moran Center in advocating for children to get out of pretrial detention. So I'll share this out again, and JJ will share it out with everyone who came today. The last piece is we also have an obligation as juvenile defenders to keep kids out of incarceration, out of prison, out of the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice, as is referred to here in our state. Mitigation matters. Mitigation matters, mitigation matters, mitigation matters. And that is a key role to any defense attorney, but particularly for juvenile defenders, where we need to remind the court constantly that this is a child. You know, Amy, I loved it, actually caught herself at one point when she was talking. She used the word minor, and then she went, no, Amy, child, right? And that's what we should be doing as lawyers. Stop using the word juvenile, please, for God's sake, in court. Never refer to your client as a juvenile or minor respondent. They are children. They are children, and words matter, and so that's what you got to say, and you got to say it often. And by the way, mitigation matters. At the Moran Center, we talk about the 3 S's. So we have to think about, when we're preparing for sentencing, for that 402 conference where you're in the back with the judge arguing against incarceration, what is the status that you're looking for? Obviously not incarceration. Where is the child going to sleep? Literally. And what's the schedule? Judges love schedules. And they love being able to look at a schedule and say, okay, you're telling me that you've accounted for every waking moment of Johnny's life. Okay, my blood pressure is down, right? So here, let me just show you real quick. Here's just a template schedule. Like literally, we map out Johnny's schedule, what it would look like for a judge. So as the judge can go, okay, all right, maybe this alternative to incarceration could actually work for this kid. And I'm going to sound like a broken record. How we make these schedules is because as lawyers, we practice with social workers. And we practice with mental health professionals. And we practice with restorative justice practitioners who are not just circle keeping, but are innovating and creating in community with us alternatives to incarceration. Okay. So in that, we are also using, again, the statute, right? So the statute, I can't remember who did it. Was it Scott? I can't remember. Somebody who talked before me, was far more brilliant, outlined the statute that really constrains the court in using incarceration, and really constrains the court using incarceration as a last resort for children. And so when you're preparing for sentencing, refer to the statute. It's there for your reference, and argue what the standard is and that the court has not met it and the state has not met it, make them work for it, okay? Make them work for it. The factors for incarceration is very similar to the factors for detention, but I'll put that up there. Ooh, my favorite factor is the last one, because of course they put the best one last. The last one is G, services within the Department of Juvenile Justice that will meet the individualized needs of the minor. So that is one of the factors the court has to take into consideration before incarcerating a kid. I love that, because if you can argue that the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice sucks and it isn't providing the services that your kid needs, the court cannot incarcerate that child. So I'll give you a quick example. I had a kid who had really complex mental health needs. What did we do? We held up the consent decree that showed that the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice was not in any way, shape, or form equipped to take care of this child's complex mental health needs. And the judge said, yeah, state, do you have an argument? Crickets. I mean, I don't even think they knew there was a consent decree. And the judge is like, okay, yeah, Mr. Keenan-Devlin, you're right. I would normally have incarcerated this child, but you've proven to me that I can't based on the statute. And so the kid was placed on probation instead of incarceration. We got to use the statute, and because the statute actually can be our friend. I mean, so that's another lesson. Mitigation matters. The statute can be your friend. I just showed you a schedule that we use when we're arguing as attorneys to have the court think about alternatives to incarceration. We always use this thought, this logic that we have to match, and you mentioned it actually at one point, Joshua, that we have to match interventions to risks, we have to match interventions to need, and we have to provide therapeutic rather than control surveillance services. Because the right services at the right dosage for the right youth is what we as juvenile defenders have to be laser focused on when we are going into sentencing. We don't want to overload our clients, and we want them to be successful. And we also want to bring the judge's blood pressure way down in thinking about that, in showing to the court that we have thought this through, that we've thought of every intervention to meet their needs, that it's community-based, community-led. And I'll say it again, we're able to do this at least at the Moran Center because we have social workers, and we all need social workers. Oh, good. I'm on my last couple slides. Hopefully I'm not talk too long. I don't have to tell this room why we should integrate social workers. But I will tell you, there's a lot of lawyers out there who get really nervous when we talk about integrating social workers because they think, oh, they're just mandated reporters that are going to screw up our ethics. If you read the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics and the Illinois Rules of Professional Conduct, the language is so similar, and our professions are so aligned as advocates, as trauma-informed advocates, as counselors. We really are professions that should be aligned and that can be aligned. And there are ways to mitigate concerns that lawyers have about integrating social workers into their practice. So again, I will share out this PowerPoint presentation. There are models of including social workers in legal defense organizations that have been tried across this country. The Moran Center uses what I refer to as the employee model, where the social workers are an agent of the lawyers, and so they are protected under the Illinois Rules of Professional Conduct. But then we also talk to our clients about what limitations social workers have. And we build that into our representation agreements, and we make sure that our clients are notified about limitations. But we as lawyers have to be really creative if we care deeply about the children that we represent, to keep them, again, out of detention, out of incarceration, and on a path to, I think someone earlier said, productive citizenry. And it can't just be us. It can't just be the lawyers. It has to be community. It has to be social workers. It has to be mental health providers. It has to be the schools. We have to talk to everybody. We have to talk to family. We got to bring everybody in. And I cannot urge enough that holistic defense is the only way to really truly represent the needs of a child and to serve a child, because that's all we are at the end of the day. We are just servants for the children that we represent. So that is my plea. I will send out the PowerPoint. Hopefully I didn't talk too fast. And thanks.
Patrick Keenan Devlin of the Moran Center for Youth Advocacy in Evanston. Are we going to take a few questions in about 5 minutes, or are we all done? I think we're all done, right? All right. One question. You know what? For our, we got to do this for our folks on Zoom.
I'm downstate in Illinois, and I worry about the making up of the sheriff's offices and some of the other police departments. I'm seeing less diversity coming, and it's just been really sad for me to see what I'm seeing. And I'm thinking maybe we need to get some vocational to draw on youth to become officers and deputies. And I think there needs to be a real push, because if we don't have the diversity we need and we don't have the understanding about life, which many of these deputies don't, in the way I've seen, it's a problem. And I think it's going to be a continuing problem. I think we need to kind of nip it in the bud early.
Okay, so we're going to wrap it up. And Betsy has asked me to remind people to turn in their CLE course evaluation form if you're trying to get some credit for this. And thank you very much to the Juvenile Justice Initiative for inviting me. I learned a ton here, and thanks to everyone who spoke today. It was super informative, and I can't wait to be looking at all this stuff myself. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. All right. We'll see y'all soon.